The clatter of porcelain plates and the hiss of running water echoed through the grand kitchen of the Langford estate. It wasn't the sound that stunned the catering staff. It was who was standing at the sink. Lila Langford, 6 months pregnant, shoulders hunched, sleeves rolled up, scrubbing lipstick-stained champagne flutes that had just been used at her own husband's dinner party. Her soft gray maternity dress clung damply to her skin, the faint swell of her belly pressing against the marble counter. "Make sure you don't miss any spots," a sharp voice sliced through the steam. It was Sienna Hart, 28, all sharp cheekbones and high heels, the so-called event planner hired for the evening. Everyone in the house knew she was more than that. The glittering diamond necklace resting on her collarbone wasn't from her own paycheck. It was from Adrian Langford, the man whose name was etched in gold on the property deeds, the man who was supposed to be Lila's husband. The kitchen staff froze. The unspoken rule of the Langford household was clear. No one questioned Sienna's presence, but tonight her power play was bolder than usual. "Faster, Lila," Sienna said, smirking as she perched on a stool sipping champagne. "We don't have all night. The guests are waiting for clean glasses." Lila's hands trembled under the hot water, but she didn't look up. Every fiber in her body screamed to drop the sponge, to tell Sienna exactly where she could put those champagne flutes. But her chest tightened as she heard footsteps approaching from behind, the deep, steady cadence she knew better than her own heartbeat. Adrian Langford walked in. Tall, broad-shouldered, every inch the millionaire tycoon he was, his presence drew instant attention. His tailored navy suit still held the faint scent of cigar smoke from the study. His sharp blue eyes scanned the room, then landed on the scene. His pregnant wife at the sink, his mistress sipping champagne beside her. Every gaze in the kitchen flicked to Adrian, expecting him to put a stop to it. To tell Sienna she had crossed a line, to protect the woman carrying his child. But Adrian didn't even flinch. Instead, his lips curled into something between a smirk and a sneer. "Sienna's right, Lila," he said, his voice low but cutting. "We can't have dirty dishes lying around. Make yourself useful." The words hit harder than any physical blow. Lila turned, her damp hair clinging to her cheeks, searching his face for some sign, some flicker that he didn't mean it. But all she found was the cold glint of a man who had already decided where his loyalty lay. And it wasn't with her. A pin-drop silence filled the kitchen. Even the dishwasher seemed to hum quieter. One of the younger waiters took a step forward, his jaw tight, but an older colleague placed a warning hand on his arm. No one challenged Adrian Langford in his own house. Sienna leaned back, her laughter low and sweet like poison. "See, even Adrian agrees. Now hurry, dear. These glasses are for the toast, Adrian's toast." She let her fingers brush against his arm in a way that made Lila's stomach churn. Lila swallowed hard, forcing herself to focus on the dishes. Her hands moved automatically, but her mind was a storm. She thought of the promises Adrian had once made. The man who had held her face between his palms and sworn he'd protect her and their future. She thought of the nights they'd stayed up, planning the nursery, the lists of baby names he'd once seemed excited to discuss. And then she thought of the last 6 months, how he'd grown distant, how Sienna had appeared at business functions, how the laughter they once shared had been replaced by empty nods and clipped conversations. The sound of glasses clinking in the dining room snapped her back to the moment. The party was in full swing. Adrian's voice, smooth and commanding, was about to echo through the halls for his grand toast. Lila was supposed to be at his side, the glowing wife of a successful man. Instead, she was hidden in the kitchen, scrubbing away evidence of an evening she hadn't been invited to enjoy. A bead of sweat trickled down her temple. The air felt heavy, like the moment before a summer storm. She had learned to bite her tongue for the sake of peace, but something in her shifted tonight. It wasn't just humiliation. It was the realization that the life she thought she was living might already be over. From the corner of her eye, she saw Sienna stand and adjust her dress, ready to return to the dining room. Adrian followed, but not before glancing back at Lila with a look that seemed almost amused. "Don't be long," he said casually. "You wouldn't want to miss my announcement." And just like that, they were gone, the sound of their laughter fading into the hum of the party. Lila set down the sponge, her breath shallow, Her reflection in the kitchen window caught her off guard. The tired eyes, the pale face, the curve of her belly. She barely recognized herself. But under that weariness, something was burning. She didn't know yet what Adrian's announcement was. But she knew one thing. If he thought she was going to stand by and watch him dismantle her dignity piece by piece, he was gravely mistaken. She dried her hands slowly, almost ceremonially, and straightened her spine. The muffled applause from the dining room told her Adrian's speech was starting. And Lila Langford decided she was going to hear every single word. Because whatever he was about to say might change everything. Before the marble halls and glittering chandeliers of the Langford estate, Lila Bennett's world had been warm but small. She grew up in a sleepy coastal town in Maine, the kind of place where everyone knew which kids were trouble and which ones would make it out. Her father, a fisherman with hands rough from the sea, taught her to value hard work. Her mother, a school librarian, taught her to find magic in the ordinary. They didn't have much money, but they had each other. Summers were salty breezes and sand between toes. Winters were cozy nights around the wood stove. Lila had always imagined she'd marry someone who shared those values, someone who believed in shared struggles and simple joys. Then came Adrian Langford. She met him at a charity event in Boston where she was working as a junior event coordinator. He was the keynote speaker, a man whose name was whispered in the financial world with equal parts awe and envy. Langford Capital had been making headlines for acquiring failing companies and turning them into gold mines. When she first shook his hand, she felt the kind of spark she'd always assumed was a cliché in movies. He looked at her, not past her, not through her, but at her, as if he were cataloging every detail. His attention was disarming. Adrian pursued her with the kind of determination that left no room for doubt. Weekend trips to Nantucket, candlelit dinners in restaurants she couldn't afford to even Google, flowers sent just because. He made her feel like the most important person in the room, even when that room was filled with people who could buy and sell her childhood home without blinking. Her friends warned her to be cautious. Men like Adrian didn't marry girls from small towns, they said. But a year later, she was walking down the aisle in a cathedral, her modest lace gown trailing behind her as photographers captured every angle. For a while, it was everything she'd dreamed. They traveled. They hosted dinners with politicians and movie stars. Adrian would lean over in crowded rooms and whisper, "You're the only one I see." She believed him. Then came the pregnancy. It hadn't been planned, but when the test showed 2 lines, Adrian had scooped her into his arms and spun her around. "We're going to be a family," he'd said, his voice thick with emotion. At least, that's how it started. The first 3 months were difficult. Morning sickness that lasted all day, dizzy spells, and exhaustion so deep she sometimes cried without knowing why. Adrian was attentive at first, bringing her ginger tea and keeping her company when she couldn't sleep. But as the months passed, the warmth faded. His business trips grew longer, the dinners without her more frequent, and then Sienna appeared. She was introduced as a contract event manager for one of Langford Capital's investor galas. Younger, glamorous in a way that was deliberately effortless, she seemed to appear everywhere Adrian was. At first, Lila told herself it was nothing. She trusted her husband. But trust is a fragile thing. It doesn't usually break with a bang, it unravels slowly. She noticed the way Sienna's hand would linger on Adrian's arm during conversations, the way Adrian's phone lit up with late-night texts he wouldn't explain, the way he stopped inviting Lila to certain events, claiming she needed to rest. When Lila confronted him gently, Adrian brushed it off with a half-smile. "You're imagining things. You've been stressed. Focus on the baby." It was the same line every time. By the time she reached her 6th month, she felt more like a shadow in her own home than a wife. The estate's endless rooms swallowed her whole. Conversations with Adrian became transactional. "What do you need from the store? Did you schedule the ultrasound?" "Yes, I'll transfer money to your account." Her isolation was compounded by whispers from the staff. They didn't say it to her face, but she caught fragments. Seen her in the study. He bought her a necklace. Poor Mrs. Langford. Yet Lila kept holding on to the image of the man she'd fallen in love with, telling herself it was just a phase. She couldn't reconcile the Adrian who kissed her forehead in the hospital during a minor scare with the Adrian who let another woman give her orders in their home. And then came the night of the dinner party, the night she was told to wash dishes in her own kitchen while Sienna sipped champagne. It wasn't just humiliating. It was a confirmation of every fear she'd been trying to bury. Because Adrian had seen her, his pregnant wife, hands submerged in soapy water, and instead of stopping it, he'd encouraged it. The woman her mother raised would have walked out right then. But Lila wasn't just herself anymore. She was carrying a life. Leaving meant more than packing a bag. It meant starting over from scratch while protecting someone who wasn't even born yet. Still, something in her shifted as she dried her hands that night. She realized that love without respect was nothing more than a gilded cage. And she was done being a bird in a cage, no matter how expensive the bars were. From the dining room, Adrian's voice rang out, smooth as glass. "And so tonight, I have an announcement to share." Lila's heart thudded in her chest. Her feet carried her toward the doorway, past the staff who kept their eyes down. She moved silently, pressing herself against the edge of the archway so she could see without being seen. The dining room glittered under crystal chandeliers. Guests in designer gowns and tuxedos turned their faces toward Adrian, waiting for his big reveal. Sienna sat near the head of the table, her red lips curved into a private smile. A champagne flute balanced effortlessly in her manicured hand. Adrian rested his palms on the table, his expression self-satisfied. As many of you know, this year has been a time of change, and with change comes new opportunities, which is why... He paused, scanning the room like a stage actor savoring the moment before the punchline. Lila gripped the wall behind her. Every instinct told her to turn away, to shield herself from whatever was about to come out of his mouth. But she didn't move. "Which is why I'm thrilled to announce," Adrian continued, "that Sienna Hart will be joining Langford Capital in a very special role." Lila's breath caught. She knew there was more, and every cell in her body told her that the next words out of his mouth were going to hit like a wrecking ball. And then Adrian said something that made the entire table gasp. "As my new chief of public relations," Adrian finished, his voice ringing out with pride. "Effective immediately, she will be the face of our brand's next expansion." For a second, Lila thought she'd misheard. Chief of Public Relations? Sienna? The same woman who had been lounging in her kitchen, ordering her around like hired help? The dining room erupted into polite applause, the kind reserved for announcements everyone knows are controversial, but no one dares challenge. A few guests exchanged knowing glances. Some smirked. Others simply looked down at their plates, unwilling to get involved. Sienna rose gracefully, the deep emerald of her gown catching the light as if to announce her triumph. "Thank you, Adrian," she purred, placing a hand on his arm. "It's such an honor to serve the company and you." Her eyes flicked to Lila's hiding place in the doorway for just a second, enough to send a sharp jolt of heat through Lila's chest. Sienna knew she was there, and she wanted her to hear every word. Adrian leaned in to whisper something in Sienna's ear. She laughed, that low, throaty sound that made Lila's stomach twist. Then Sienna turned to the crowd. "And of course, we couldn't have done this without the support of the Langford family." Lila's heart pounded as Sienna added, "Lila has been gracious in allowing me to take on such a big role during her maternity leave." The room chuckled, just a few soft laughs, but enough to make Lila's skin crawl. It wasn't just what Sienna said, it was the way she said it. As if Lila were some fragile porcelain doll tucked away on a shelf while the real work got done. Lila wanted to disappear, to melt into the polished marble floor. But before she could slip away, Adrian's voice called out, "Lila, darling, come in here for a moment." Every head turned toward the doorway. Lila froze. She had two choices: turn and walk away, which would feed the whispers already circling the room, or step forward into the spotlight. She lifted her chin and walked in. Her gray maternity dress felt too plain, too ordinary, against the sea of sequins and tailored suits. The weight of 100 eyes pressed against her, each one measuring, judging. Adrian held out a hand. "Everyone, my wife, Lila." The applause was polite but thin. She forced a smile, her hand resting protectively over her belly. Adrian's tone was smooth, but there was something in his eyes, cold amusement, as though this were all part of a private game. Lila has been such a trooper these last few months, keeping things running at home while I've been busy. And of course, she's been a great help in getting Sienna up to speed. A murmur rippled through the room. Lila could almost hear the subtext. Busy with what exactly? Sienna stepped forward, holding a champagne flute. You've been a wonderful hostess tonight, Lila. Those dishes won't wash themselves, will they? Gasps and muffled laughs broke out among the guests. Lila felt the heat rise to her cheeks. She glanced at Adrian, waiting, hoping for him to shut Sienna down. Instead, he chuckled. Well, she's always been hands-on. That's what makes her special. The humiliation was suffocating. Lila's vision blurred at the edges. She wanted to scream, to hurl the nearest glass against the wall, to demand how he could treat her like this in front of their friends, colleagues, and the city's elite. But she didn't, because she understood something in that moment. This wasn't an accident. Adrian wanted her to feel small. He wanted to cement Sienna's place not just in his company, but in their social circle. And if she reacted, if she gave in to the burning anger clawing at her throat, she would be playing right into his hands. So Lila smiled. It wasn't warm or sweet. It was the kind of smile that masked steel. Of course, she said evenly. Anything for the company. For the briefest moment, she saw something flicker in Adrian's expression. Confusion? Annoyance? Whatever it was, it vanished quickly, replaced by his usual self-satisfied smirk. The dinner moved on, but the whispers didn't stop. Every time Lila's eyes met another guest's, she saw pity or intrigue staring back. It was worse than outright cruelty. It was the confirmation that they all saw her as the wounded wife who couldn't keep her husband's attention. When dessert was served, Lila excused herself, claiming she needed rest. She walked back through the long, echoing hallways of the estate, her heels clicking softly against the marble. The sound reminded her of another night, one early in their marriage, when Adrian had carried her through these same halls after a gala, her laughter ringing off the walls. Now there was no laughter, just silence. She reached the master bedroom and closed the door, leaning against it for support. Her hands were shaking, not from sadness, but from the force of everything she'd held in. She sat on the edge of the bed, the muted thump of music from the dining room barely reaching her. In the quiet, she let herself imagine what life would be like if she walked away. No mansion, no chauffeur, no endless parties. Just her, the baby, and a chance to build something real again. But with that thought came the fear. Where would she go? How would she protect her child from a man like Adrian, who had influence in every corner of the city? A knock at the door broke her thoughts. She opened it to find Margaret, the oldest housemaid, standing there with a tray. On it was a single glass of water and a folded note. Margaret's eyes were kind, but guarded. "This was left for you in the kitchen, ma'am. I thought you should see it right away." Lila took the note, her pulse quickening. The handwriting wasn't Adrian's, it was sharp, deliberate. She unfolded it. "You deserve better than this. When you're ready, I can help." There was no name, just an address scrawled at the bottom, an address she recognized instantly. It belonged to someone Adrian had once called his biggest rival. Lila looked up at Margaret. "Who gave you this?" Margaret hesitated. "A driver, not one of ours." The music from the dining room swelled again, and Lila knew the night wasn't over, not by a long shot. She set the note on the nightstand, her mind racing. Someone out there was offering her a way out, and for the first time in months, she felt the faintest flicker of hope. Lila sat on the edge of the bed, the folded note still on the nightstand, like a loaded weapon she wasn't sure she dared to touch. The room felt both enormous and suffocating. Every chandelier crystal, every perfectly arranged pillow, every glint of gold trim was a reminder that she was living in a house built more for appearances than for love. She had fought to hold herself together downstairs, but now the dam broke. Her hands clutched at the comforter as the first sob ripped through her chest. Tears blurred her vision, hot and relentless, dripping down onto the silk of her dress. How had she gone from the woman Adrian once called his lucky charm to the one washing dishes while his mistress toasted her victory? The sound of faint laughter floated up from below. Sienna's laughter. It was muffled by walls and distance, but Lila could hear it like it was right beside her ear. That laugh wasn't just confidence, it was possession. She pulled off her heels, letting them fall to the floor with a dull thud. Her feet ached, her back throbbed, and her baby kicked softly as if sensing her turmoil. She pressed a hand over her belly, whispering, "I'm sorry, little one. I promise I'll do better for you." The promise tasted bitter. How could she protect a child when she couldn't even protect herself? Her mind flashed back to the day she told Adrian she was pregnant. He had lifted her off the floor, spinning her around in their kitchen, laughing like a boy. "We'll be unstoppable now," he'd said. At the time, she thought he meant as a family. Now she wondered if he'd meant something else entirely. The knock on the door startled her. She half expected Margaret again, but when she opened it, no one was there. Just a silver tray on the floor, with a small bowl of soup and a folded linen napkin. A card was tucked under the napkin. In handwriting she did recognize this time. "Eat something. You'll need your strength." It was from Margaret. Simple words, but they carried the weight of someone who'd seen more than she could say aloud. Lila set the tray inside and closed the door. She didn't touch the soup. Her stomach was too tight. Instead, she lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind spinning between fear and anger. She thought about the address on the first note. It was in the city's financial district, inside a sleek tower belonging to Cole Harrington, a man Adrian despised. Rumors painted Cole as ruthless in business, but fiercely loyal to those he cared about. He was the kind of man who remembered every slight and never forgot a debt. Why would he want to help her? What did he stand to gain? The baby kicked again, harder this time, pulling her back to the present. She rolled to her side, hugging a pillow to her chest. She told herself she'd think about it in the morning, but morning didn't bring clarity. Instead, she woke to an empty side of the bed and a text from Adrian. "Gone early. Meetings all day. Don't wait up." No apology for last night, no acknowledgement of what had happened. She dressed slowly, pulling on a soft sweater and leggings, then padded downstairs. The dining room still bore traces of the party, half-empty wine glasses, stray napkins, a faint smell of truffle lingering in the air. The kitchen staff moved quietly, avoiding her eyes. Sienna was gone, but her presence lingered like perfume that wouldn't wash out. Lila poured herself a cup of coffee, but her hands shook too much to hold it steady. She set it down untouched and sank into one of the breakfast nook chairs. Her phone buzzed. Another text, but not from Adrian. "If you're serious about leaving, the door's open. Noon today. Cole Harrington's office." Her breath caught. The note from last night wasn't a bluff. She stared at the phone, her mind tug-of-warring between two paths. One meant staying here, enduring Adrian's humiliation, telling herself she was doing it for the baby. The other meant walking into the unknown, possibly making herself a target in Adrian's world. Margaret's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Mrs. Langford, your doctor's appointment is this afternoon. I can have the driver take you." Lila nodded absently, though her mind was already mapping a different route. Noon was hours before her appointment. She could go to Cole's office, hear him out, and be back before anyone noticed. But fear gripped her again. What if it was a trap? What if Cole was just another man who saw her as leverage in a business war? She thought of the look in Sienna's eyes last night, the smirk in Adrian's, the champagne glass in her own trembling hand as she forced herself to smile through the humiliation. Her decision crystallized. She would go. Not because she trusted Cole, but because she trusted herself less and less the longer she stayed here. The rest of the morning crawled by. She packed her handbag with essentials, wallet, phone, prenatal vitamins, a small silver locket her mother had given her before she passed. She didn't know if she was leaving for an hour or forever, but she wanted something familiar with her. By the time the clock struck 11, her pulse was a steady drumbeat in her ears. She told the driver she needed to stop downtown before her appointment. He didn't ask questions. Langford staff never did. The city was gray and restless, the kind of late winter morning where the sky pressed low and the streets glistened from an earlier rain. As the car pulled up to the Harrington Tower, she stared up at the glass and steel monolith. Cole's name was etched in gold on the lobby wall, his presence as palpable as Adrian's in his own estate. She took a deep breath, stepped out of the car, and walked toward the revolving doors. Each turn felt like crossing a line she couldn't uncross. Inside, the lobby was all sharp angles and cool marble. A receptionist looked up, her professional smile faltering just slightly when she recognized Lila. "Mr. Harrington is expecting you," she said, pressing a button on her headset. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt endless. When the doors opened, a tall man in a dark suit was waiting. His eyes were unreadable, but there was a flicker of curiosity there. "Mrs. Langford," he said. "Right this way." Lila followed him down a long hallway to a set of double glass doors. He opened them, and there, standing by a wall of windows with the city spread out behind him, was Cole Harrington himself. He turned, his gaze locking on hers. "Lila." Her throat went dry. "Let's talk about how we can help each other," he said. And in that moment, Lila realized her life was about to take a turn she could never have predicted. Cole Harrington's office was nothing like Adrian's. Where Adrian's study was heavy with dark wood, velvet curtains, and the scent of expensive cigars, Cole's space was all light and glass. The skyline poured in through floor-to-ceiling windows, the city alive beneath them. He moved toward her with the easy confidence of a man used to controlling the room. But there was something in his eyes, sharpness, yes, but also a flicker of something warmer. "I'm not going to pretend this isn't unusual," Cole began, gesturing for her to sit. "You don't know me, and I don't know you. Not personally. But I know your husband." Lila sat cautiously, her hands folded over her belly. "That's exactly what worries me." He smiled faintly, leaning back in his chair. "It should. Adrian Langford plays to win, and when he thinks someone's in his way, he makes sure they lose completely." "I'm not in his way," she said quickly, though the words felt hollow. Cole's gaze didn't waver. "Lila, last night's spectacle wasn't an accident. That was a power play. He wanted to humiliate you in front of his peers, and he wanted Sienna to shine." She swallowed hard. Hearing someone else say it out loud made the humiliation feel raw all over again. "So why do you care?" Cole leaned forward, his elbows resting on the desk. "Because Adrian made the same mistake with me once. Underestimated me, and I've been waiting for the right opportunity to return the favor." She shook her head. "I'm not interested in being your pawn in some business feud." His smile widened, not with amusement, but with respect. "Good, I'm not offering to make you a pawn. I'm offering to make you a player." The words hung in the air. "A player in what?" she asked. "In your own life," he said simply. "Adrian thinks you're fragile, dependent. That's his first mistake. The second is thinking no one would dare back you. I'm willing to back you. Financially, strategically, whatever it takes." Lila stared at him, the city's light glinting off the glass behind him. "Why?" "Because you have something he doesn't expect you to use," Cole said. "His name, his access, and the sympathy of every person who saw him belittle you last night." She let out a short, humorless laugh. "Sympathy doesn't pay rent." "No," Cole agreed. "But it can open doors, and once they're open, you can walk through on your own." He slid a folder across the desk. Inside were documents, business plans, PR proposals, even a preliminary budget. She skimmed the pages, her brow furrowing. "This is a nonprofit?" she asked. "Not just a nonprofit," Cole corrected. "An initiative for women in business, seed funding, mentorship, visibility. Your name at the top, you'd be the face of it, the driving force. It'll make headlines, and more importantly, it'll make you untouchable. Adrian can't paint you as the abandoned wife if you're out there building something of your own." She looked up. "You've been planning this." "Let's just say I like to be ready when an opportunity walks through my door," he replied. "And you, Lila, are an opportunity." She closed the folder slowly. "And what do you get out of it?" "A front-row seat when Adrian realizes he can't control you anymore," Cole said without hesitation. "And maybe the satisfaction of watching him squirm." Part of her wanted to reject him outright, to avoid becoming another piece in some man's game. But another part of her, the part that had been quiet for months, felt something stirring. Not revenge exactly, but the idea of taking back control, of writing her own story. "What if I say yes?" she asked quietly. "Then we start today," Cole said. "We build your public image. We prepare you for interviews. And when the time comes, you walk into a room where Adrian expects to see a victim, and instead, he sees a force he can't stop." Lila exhaled slowly, her fingers brushing over the edge of the folder. She thought of the baby growing inside her, of the life she wanted to create, A life where no one could strip away her dignity. "I'll think about it," she said, rising to her feet. Cole didn't push. "That's all I ask. My number's in the folder. If you decide to move forward, call me." As she rode the elevator down, the city seemed different. The noise wasn't so overwhelming, the crowd not so anonymous. She felt lighter, though she couldn't explain why. The driver was waiting outside. "Straight to your appointment, Mrs. Langford?" he asked. She nodded, but her mind wasn't on the doctor's office. It was on the folder in her lap, the pages that outlined a future where she wasn't just surviving, she was leading. The ultrasound appointment passed in a blur. The doctor confirmed the baby was healthy, strong. Lila smiled and thanked her, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Cole's offer. By the time she returned to the estate, dusk was settling in. Adrian wasn't home yet. No surprise there. She went straight upstairs, closing the bedroom door behind her. She opened the folder again, running her fingers over the bold header. The Langford Women's Initiative. Even the name felt like a reclamation. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to imagine a life without Adrian. Not a life of hiding, but one of standing in front of cameras, speaking with purpose, making real change. Her phone buzzed, a message from Adrian. "Big investor dinner tomorrow night. Be ready by 7. Wear something appropriate." She stared at the words. Appropriate, as if she were a child needing instructions. She typed out a reply, then erased it. Instead, she closed the folder, placed it in her desk drawer, and locked it. She wasn't ready to say yes to Cole. But she also wasn't ready to say no. Because deep down, she knew the next move she made could either destroy her or set her free. And part of her was starting to crave the risk. The next morning, Lila woke with a decision burning in her chest. It wasn't a neatly wrapped plan, but it was a start. She was done waiting for her life to happen to her. She called the number in Cole Harrington's folder. "I'll do it," she said when he answered. There was a pause on the other end, then the faintest trace of satisfaction in his voice. "Good. I'll send someone over within the hour." "Someone?" she asked. "A team," he replied. "If you're going to step into the spotlight, you're going to look and move like you belong there. No halfway measures." True to his word, exactly 1 hour later, 2 sleek black cars pulled into the Langford Estate's driveway. Out stepped a small army, stylists with rolling garment racks, a makeup artist wheeling a case the size of a small dresser, and a woman in a crisp blazer carrying a leather-bound planner. "I'm Rachel, image consultant," the blazered woman said, shaking Lila's hand with a firm grip. "We've got 3 weeks to turn you into someone the press can't get enough of. I hope you're ready to work." Lila hesitated. 3 weeks? Rachel smiled. "By then, you'll be ready to walk into any room, even one with your husband and his mistress, and have every eye on you for the right reasons." The transformation began immediately. The stylist swept through her wardrobe, pulling out the muted, shapeless dresses she'd clung to during her pregnancy, and replacing them with tailored silhouettes, rich colors, and fabrics that moved with her. They spoke in a language of necklines, hemlines, and cuts that Lila barely understood. But slowly she began to see the difference in the mirror. Her hair, once left to hang in simple waves, was shaped and styled into a glossy, face-framing cut. The makeup artist kept her features soft but defined, her eyes lined just enough to make them stand out in a crowd. But the makeover wasn't just physical. Rachel worked with her on posture, teaching her how to walk into a room like she owned it, how to hold a champagne glass without looking like she was clinging to it for support, how to angle her shoulders during photographs. "Power isn't always loud," Rachel said as they practiced in the living room. "It's in the stillness, the way you let other people's energy come to you instead of chasing theirs." In the afternoons, Cole brought in a media coach named Devon, a sharp-tongued former journalist who grilled her with mock interview questions. "What would you say to people who think you're just Adrian Langford's wife?" Devon asked one afternoon. "I'd say I'm more than that," Lila replied, trying to sound confident. "Too vague," Devon shot back. "You're not here to convince them you exist. You're here to make them believe you're indispensable. Start again." By the end of the first week, Lila was exhausted but different. She no longer avoided her reflection. She looked herself in the eye. Cole checked in every few days, always with the same direct tone. "You're improving. Keep going." One afternoon he arrived unannounced, catching her mid-lesson with Devon. He watched her answer a particularly tough question about leadership and then smiled faintly. "You're ready for a test," he said. "A test?" "There's a charity art auction tomorrow night. Adrian will be there. So will half the city's press. It's the perfect place to debut the new you." Her pulse quickened. "And what exactly am I debuting?" "A woman who doesn't look like she's been crying in her bedroom while her husband parades his mistress around," Cole said bluntly. "You walk in there and make them wonder what they've been missing." The next evening, she stood in front of the mirror in a sapphire silk gown that draped perfectly over her bump without hiding it. Her hair gleamed under the soft light, her makeup was flawless, and her eyes no longer looked defeated. Rachel adjusted the gown strap one last time. "Remember, you're not chasing anyone's attention tonight. They'll give it to you whether they mean to or not." When she arrived at the auction, the flash of cameras was immediate. She hadn't realized how long it had been since she'd been photographed in public without Adrian by her side. Reporters called her name, asking about the baby, about her work. She gave polite, controlled answers, each one echoing the training Devon drilled into her. Then she saw him. Adrian stood near the main stage, Sienna on his arm in a crimson gown that seemed chosen purely to draw attention. His eyes found her almost instantly, a flicker of surprise crossing his face before he masked it with a cool smile. "Lila," he said when she approached, his gaze scanning her from head to toe. "You look different." She smiled faintly. "I am different." Sienna's smirk faltered just slightly. "What brings you here?" "I didn't think you were into these events anymore." Lila tilted her head. "Oh, I'm very into them, especially when the right people are watching." Adrian's jaw tightened, but before he could reply, a photographer approached. "Mrs. Langford, could we get a shot of you for the society pages?" She turned to the camera, her posture perfect, her smile subtle but sure. The flash went off, and she knew the image would be everywhere by morning. She didn't stay near Adrian and Sienna. Instead, she worked the room, speaking with gallery owners, philanthropists, and reporters. And with every conversation, she felt the power shift. People weren't looking at her as a footnote to Adrian anymore. They were looking at her. By the end of the night, she caught Cole's eye from across the room. He gave her a small nod, the kind that said, "You passed." As she left, she felt something she hadn't in months, momentum. And she knew it was only the beginning. The morning after the charity auction, Lila's phone buzzed nonstop. Photos of her in the sapphire gown were splashed across society pages and gossip blogs, captioned with phrases like, "Lila Langford stuns in solo appearance," and "Is Mrs. Langford back in the spotlight?" She hadn't realized how hungry the press had been for her return until they swarmed her inbox with interview requests. Rachel's media training paid off. She accepted only 2, both with respected outlets that would frame her as poised and purposeful rather than desperate for attention. But the real opportunity came 3 days later. Margaret brought her a formal, cream-colored envelope embossed with gold. Inside was an invitation to the Langford Capital Investors Gala, an annual event that Adrian treated like his personal coronation. Attendance wasn't just a social obligation, it was a statement of power. For years, Lila had stood at his side, smiling for cameras, shaking hands with politicians and CEOs. This year, she knew it would be different. She called Cole. "I'm going," she said simply. "Good," he replied. "This is the stage you've been preparing for." The week leading up to the gala was a blur of preparation. Rachel sourced a custom gown, midnight black with a subtle shimmer, the kind that caught the light just enough to draw the eye without screaming for attention. Devon worked with her on sound bites she could drop into casual conversation, each one designed to travel through the room like wildfire. But the most important part wasn't the gown or the quotes. It was the plan. Cole's team had discreetly compiled a portfolio of Adrian's questionable business dealings, each one backed by solid documentation. Nothing illegal enough to land him in court tomorrow, but enough to make investors nervous if the information were to circulate. Lila didn't need to expose him fully, just plant the seeds. The night of the gala, the ballroom glittered under crystal chandeliers. The air was thick with the scent of champagne and the hum of ambition. Lila arrived alone, stepping out of the car into a wall of camera flashes. Inside, Adrian stood near the center of the room, Sienna draped on his arm in a gown of silver sequins. His smile froze when he saw Lila. "Darling," he said, kissing the air beside her cheek. "You look striking." She returned the smile. "Thank you. I thought it was time." Sienna's eyes narrowed just slightly. "Didn't realize you were still attending these." "Oh, I wouldn't miss it," Lila replied. "Especially when there's so much to celebrate." And then she walked away, leaving them standing in the middle of the room, forced to watch her glide effortlessly into conversations with people who used to ignore her. She approached a cluster of investors, each holding a glass of scotch. "Gentlemen," she greeted warmly, "I've been hearing interesting things about Langford Capital's overseas ventures." Their curiosity was instant. "Oh?" one asked. "Just chatter," she said lightly. "But you know how markets react to uncertainty. Even whispers can shake things up." She smiled, excused herself, and moved on, never staying long enough to be pressed for details. By the end of the first hour, she'd spoken with half the key investors in the room, each conversation laced with just enough intrigue to make them wonder what she knew. The real climax came when Adrian took the stage for his annual address. He spoke of growth, stability, and vision for the future, until a voice from the audience interrupted. "Is that before or after the overseas restructuring?" a man called out. The question rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. Adrian's smile faltered, just for a second, before he recovered. "Our overseas operations are strong," he said smoothly. "Any rumors to the contrary are unfounded." But the seed had been planted, and Lila knew exactly who had watered it. After the speech, Adrian found her near the dessert table. His jaw was tight, his voice low. "What are you doing?" "Enjoying the gala," she said innocently. "Don't play games with me, Lila," he warned. "You think I don't know where this sudden confidence is coming from?" She met his gaze evenly. "Maybe I finally remembered who I am." Sienna appeared at his side, sliding her arm through his. "Come on, Adrian, don't waste your time." Lila turned to Sienna, her smile icy. "Don't worry, I'm done wasting mine." Before either could reply, a photographer approached. "Mrs. Langford, can we get a shot of you with the governor?" "Of course," she said, stepping away without looking back. The rest of the evening was a blur of handshakes, strategic compliments, and carefully placed hints. By the time she left, she could feel the shift in the room. Investors who had entered confident were now whispering in corners, eyes darting toward Adrian. Cole called her as soon as she was in the car. "You did it," he said. "I didn't say anything concrete," she replied. "You didn't have to," he said. "They'll fill in the blanks themselves, and by the time they realize how much they're doubting him, it'll be too late." She hung up, leaning back against the seat. The city lights blurred past the window, but she wasn't looking at them. She was looking ahead, to the day when Adrian would realize he'd lost control not just of the narrative but of her entirely. And she knew that day was coming faster than he could possibly imagine. 2 weeks after the gala, Adrian Langford's empire began to show cracks. It started small, an investor pulling out of a planned expansion, citing market uncertainties. Then another postponed a major deal. The whispers Lila had seeded were sprouting faster than Adrian could stamp them out. From the outside, she kept her hands clean. She attended charity luncheons, spoke at a women's business panel Cole had arranged, and appeared in glossy magazine spreads about empowered motherhood. Every move she made seemed designed to show the world that she was thriving and independent. Adrian, meanwhile, was scrambling. She knew because Sienna had started showing up less in public. Without the security of a man at the top of his game, Sienna's loyalty was clearly negotiable. Then came the board meeting. Cole called her the night before. "Tomorrow is your moment," he said. "You've been named an honorary board advisor for the Women's Initiative. That puts you in the room when Adrian faces the shareholders. Don't hold back." The next morning, she dressed with care, a cream-sheath dress, pearls, hair swept back. She looked calm, approachable, and impossible to underestimate. The Langford Capital boardroom was a cathedral of glass and steel, the city sprawling below. Adrian sat at the head of the long table, his suit immaculate, his expression strained. "Let's get started," he said, launching into a presentation about stability and growth. But as the financial charts scrolled by, hands began to rise. "What about the restructuring overseas?" one shareholder asked. Why have two major investors pulled funding? Another demanded. Adrian fielded the questions with increasingly clipped answers. And then someone turned to Lila. Mrs. Langford, you've been active in public circles lately. What's your perspective? She could feel Adrian's eyes boring into her, warning her to tread carefully. But she wasn't here to protect him. I think investors deserve transparency, she said evenly. Markets respond to trust, and trust is built on honesty. If there are issues, they should be addressed before they escalate. Otherwise, the entire foundation risks collapse. Her words hung in the air. They weren't an accusation, but they were a mirror, showing the board exactly what they feared. Adrian's jaw tightened. Lila isn't involved in company affairs, he said. Maybe she should be, one of the older board members replied. She's right. Trust is everything. The meeting ended with no resolution, but the damage was done. Adrian had been challenged in front of his own board and by his own wife. That night, he confronted her at the estate. What the hell do you think you're doing? He demanded. She met his glare without flinching. I'm doing what you should have done, protecting the legacy. You think humiliating me made you look strong? All it did was make people wonder if you can lead without tearing others down. You're aligning yourself with Harrington, he accused. She tilted her head. I'm aligning myself with people who respect me. Can you say the same? For the first time, Adrian had no immediate comeback. The following week, the headlines exploded. Langford Capital faces shareholder revolt. Behind the scenes, Cole had helped key investors draft a proposal to restructure leadership, one that would strip Adrian of his majority control unless he stepped down voluntarily. He didn't step down quietly. There were calls, threats, attempts to smear Lila in the press. But by then, her public image was untouchable. Every attack he launched only made her seem more dignified by comparison. And then, one crisp spring morning, it was over. Adrian resigned. Officially, it was to focus on family, but everyone knew the truth. His influence had been dismantled piece by piece, and the woman he'd tried to humiliate had become the face of a movement he couldn't touch. The day the news broke, Lila stood on a stage at the launch of the Langford Women's Initiative. Cameras flashed as she spoke about opportunity, resilience, and the importance of never letting someone else write your story. Cole stood at the back, arms crossed, a small smile playing on his lips. When the speech ended and the applause filled the room, she caught his eye and mouthed, "Thank you." After the event, she returned to the estate, not to live there, but to pack the last of her things. The house felt smaller now, its grandeur hollow. She walked through each room without nostalgia, only relief. Margaret met her at the door. "You did it," the older woman said quietly. Lila hugged her. "We did it." Her new home was a sunlit townhouse in the city, close to the initiative's headquarters. It wasn't as big as the estate, but it was hers. Every detail, from the books on the shelves to the kitchen she actually cooked in, was chosen for comfort, not for show. One evening, months later, she sat on the balcony with her newborn daughter nestled in her arms. The city hummed below, alive and unbothered. She thought of the woman she'd been when Sienna told her to wash dishes, the one who'd swallowed humiliation for the sake of keeping the peace. That woman was gone. In her place was someone stronger, not hard but unbreakable. Her phone buzzed. A message from Cole. "You're trending again." Apparently, powerful women make the best headlines. She smiled, setting the phone aside. Power was nice. But freedom, that was everything. She looked down at her daughter, brushing a kiss against her tiny forehead. "No one will ever tell you who you are," she whispered. "You'll decide that for yourself." The baby stirred, her small fingers curling around Lila's. And in that moment, with the city lights flickering like 1,000 new beginnings, Lila knew she had won. Not just against Adrian, not just for herself, but for the life she was building, one that no one could take away. And she vowed she'd never let anyone put her back in a cage again. So that's how the story closes, my friends. And if you're still here, all the way to this moment, it means something in Lila's journey has touched your heart. Remember what the Stoics said: you have power over your mind, not outside events. We can't control betrayal, but we can control our response. If this story spoke to you, like, share, and subscribe. Let's keep building strength together.